Hello, fellas. Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Hey there. How we doing?
Okay.
Pretty good. How are you?
Fabulous.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. This is Kevin. Have we got a quorum? Hi, Jim. I see you're on there. Bob's there. Chris Mello and David is on there. So we have a quorum now. Excellent.
I'm not the Bob on your committee. I'm Bob Claremont.
Oh, hi, Bob Claremont. I need to wait for Bob. No, I still have a quorum, so he'll have to call in if he hasn't already. Okay,
I'm
so
here, Kevin.
time being, what's that?
Oh, okay. I just wanted to let you know I just logged
Oh,
in.
hi, Deb.
How are you?
Good, thanks. Okay, time being 4:17, quorum being present, I will call the meeting of the Freetown Planning Board to order. Before we get started, I need to read this announcement. Pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the Freetown Planning Board will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and/or parties with a right and/or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the Town of Freetown's website, freetownma.gov. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to listen to the meeting or participate in the public hearing may do so in the following manner: downloading Zoom and entering the meeting ID below, calling the number listed below and entering the meeting ID listed below, or by going to zoom.com and entering the meeting ID listed below. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so despite best efforts, we will post on Freetown's website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. Okay, with that out of the way, we have a few things on our agenda tonight, but I will tell you this, that we have been asked to continue every one of the public hearings short of the continuation of the bylaw public hearing. So they've all been asked to continue to 10/6, October 6th. Unfortunately, I know we'd like to go back to the 6 o'clock meetings, and we're going to do that after the 6th. Because a while back we continued the public hearing for the project on South Main Street to 4:15 and on the 6th. So again, we were anticipating that we'd still be able to be meeting outside. We wouldn't have the threat of Tripoli and West Nile, and we would have the use of bathrooms at whatever facility we were using. Since West Nile and Tripoli have come to visit our region, and since we are not allowed to use any public restrooms or have it has been determined that this is going to have to be the means by which we continue on with our meetings. So that being said, what I will do is individually call the public hearings to order. I will ask for a motion to continue to the 6th of October at 4:15 p.m. I'll need a second, and then once we do that, it is a roll call vote. I will say your name, and then you can state aye, nay, or recuse yourself or abstain. Okay, is everybody good with that?
I'm good.
All right, don't forget, folks, that if you are automatically muted when you join our meeting. To unmute yourself, you would have to hit *6, and that would unmute you. So we have the item number 1 is public hearing. This is for an application for a definitive subdivision plan, 1 Mendacia Way. The applicant has asked for a continuation to 10/6/2020. I'll call that public hearing to order, and I'll entertain a motion to continue.
I'll make a motion to continue the public hearing to October 6th at 6 PM. Is that correct? That's the time you want to do?
No, it's got to be at 4:15 for the 6th, but after that, we're going to go to the 6
Okay.
o'clock.
4:15, and well, that'll be a Zoom also?
Via Zoom, correct. Yeah, going forward, everything's going to be Zoom until Governor Baker and all change their rules. So we have a motion to continue it to the 6th. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
Motion's been made and supported. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Roll call. Bob Joe states
Aye.
Bob Joe states aye. Debbie Robbins states
Aye.
Debbie Robbins states aye. Jim Freites?
Aye.
Jim Freites states aye. Chris Mello? Chris, are you with us? Is he
Unmute.
on, Chris? Are you
Hello?
muted, Chris? Hello, Chris, yes. Yay or nay on the motion to continue?
Yes, aye.
Yes. All right. So Chris Mello says aye. Kevin DeMar states aye. Motion carries unanimous. It's continued to the 6th. Okay, I'll call back to order a public hearing for TJA Clean Energy LLC, Freetown Solar. This is for a solar application located off of Chase Road. They have also asked for a continuation to 10/6/2020 at 4:15 via Zoom. I'll entertain that motion.
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been made and supported. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Roll call. Bob Joes.
Aye.
Bob Joes states aye. Debbie Robbins.
Aye.
Debbie Robbins, aye. Jim Freites.
Aye.
Jim Freites, aye. Chris Mello.
Aye.
Chris Mello, aye. Kevin Damaris, aye. Motion carries unanimous. Continue to the 6th. Next on our agenda, I will call back to order a public hearing for Quarry Drive Bryant Hill LLC. This is for solar at the Cape Cod aggregate site. They've also asked for a continuance to 10/6. So I will entertain a motion that we do that, continue to the 6th at 4:15 via Zoom.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made and supported. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Bob Joes.
Aye.
Deb Robbins.
Aye.
Bob Joes states aye. Deb Robbins says aye. Jim Freites.
Aye.
Jim Freites, aye. Chris Mello.
Aye.
Chris Mello, aye. Kevin Damaris states aye. Motion carries unanimously. It's continued to the 6th. We have a request for a public hearing continuance, so I will call back to order the public hearing for 125 South Main Street LLC. This is a mixed-use development containing approximately 72 units of residential apartment buildings with a mini self-storage. This project is still within engineering and some changes are being made. The applicant has asked for a request to continue to the 6th. We've already continued that public hearing to the 6th? Debbie's? The South Main Street, the 125 South Main Street?
May have. I have to check that.
I think we had continued already to the 4:15, so I'll entertain a motion that we continue that to 4:15
So
on
moved.
the 6th.
Second.
Motion made and supported. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Bob Joes.
Aye.
Deb Robbins.
Abstain.
Bob Joes states aye. Deb Robbins abstains. Jim Freites.
Aye.
Aye. Chris Mello.
Aye.
Aye. Kevin Damaris states aye. Motion carries unanimous. Okay. So those are all the other public hearings that were asked to be continued. So the only thing remaining on our agenda for tonight is the continuation of our discussion that we started last week relative to the solar bylaw, and most specifically, we were talking about setbacks and ways that we can improve, if you will, the solar bylaw. So that being said, I will call that public hearing back to order. And before we get started, we received a couple letters. One asked some very pointed questions relative to this procedure and to statements that were made at the last meeting. So I'd like to just briefly address that, if you will. So one of the comments was, and I'm going to paraphrase these things. Everybody has a copy of the letters. This one was from residents at 14 Algonquin Way. Relative to the public hearing being held in a Zoom format, I can tell you personally, I don't like it at all, and we held out for it, and we were one of the first deliberative bodies here in town to actually start having face-to-face public hearings outside as soon as we could. Unfortunately, we were defeated one night by a tropical storm. We've got Tripoli and West Nile around, so it's been recommended that we limit any kind of outdoor activities. So that's why we were trying to meet at 4:15 to eliminate that stuff. And then most recently, we were told that the public and ourselves could not use restrooms if we were to actually say, go to the COA. And that to me is entirely unfair, to ask people to sit there for multiple hours and not be able to use the restrooms. So while it is an awful situation that the entire Commonwealth is in, we are following the letter of the law, and we are trying, and we tried, just this COVID and Mother Nature kind of defeated us. Relative to the 4:15 starts, again, those were continuations with the expectation that we were going to be meeting outside, and we did not want to be meeting outside at night or closer to dusk. More specific, so another item that was asked specifically about what was stated at the last meeting, relative to the planning board members, stated that these solar projects are good for the town because the town is making millions from them. It's not a direct quote. It was me who said them. I think it was more in the lines of what, certainly my intent was to say that we bring in $1 million or to just over $1 million a year in taxes from them. They go on to speak about the fact that the state of Massachusetts has a law that was meant and intended for residential solar, but commercial solar, for whatever reason, has found some success in utilizing that. And what does that state? Basically, not to do the assessor's job, but to speak for them, but it diminishes the value or the assessment that we can have on the actual solar arrays themselves. The land and some of the improvements around it would be taxable, and we would get full and fair value for that. To date, we have been collecting fair and full value on everything. We are currently awaiting the state. There has been some court cases where the solar applicants have been successful, but it's always pointed out that the legislature has to do something to fortify the language. Now, I can tell you personally, I reached out, it's probably close to a year ago now, after meeting with State Rep Carol Fiola. I reached out to our town administrator and said, we need to square away this, whether it's as a region, we approach the state legislature to tell them that, you know, this is going to put many a town in a bad spot if they're not allowed to tax. I say bad spot. It won't not as an advantageous position. So that is currently being worked out. So that is partially accurate that we would not get full value, but it's not accurate that they are not taxed at all. I can tell you that, and this is, we have approximately approximately a dozen solar arrays located within the town. Currently the town, and I just got this hot off the presses from the assessor's office, currently the town collects $883,804.48 a year. And that is not including the 5 that are yet to be fully assessed, simply because they either aren't completed yet, have not been picked up in this latest cycle of taxing assessments, and they're anticipated that they will be in the next cycle. So when the statement was made that we collect over $1 million, that was with the anticipation that the other 5 or 6 that are yet to be completed and not fully assessed would be paying on that assessment. So that was something that I wanted to address too, to make sure that people understood. It was a good question, and I think that that deserved an answer. For clarification too, because we received a couple of letters, the purpose of this bylaw is not to try and fix something that is existing. It will not fix, it cannot fix. It's not to make changes mid-project, so now these solar arrays would have to change how they're doing things. This is specifically to move forward, going forward. How do we look at solar, and how do we permit them going forward in the and we're really looking specifically at residential areas. So that being said, they're rather lengthy letters, and I'm not going to read every one of them verbatim. They are part of the record. Chris, let's make sure that they are. We have received them, so if they do, it becomes part of the record. All the board members have received them and have the ability to read them from home. So again, just so that everybody understands, this is a very specific public hearing relative to our existing bylaw and proposed changes, specifically, but not limited to, the setback to abutting residential neighborhoods and or zones. There was, I think, some definition in there relative to the vegetative buffer. But so it seemed from some of the letters that I needed to clear up that that is what we're doing here today and talking about. So that being said, I know I received some input from other planning board members, a couple of letters. I know I got a phone call, or the office had gotten a phone call from some. So if I could, Bob, I know that you had submitted a letter, and I think that I would like you to, not to put you on the spot, Bob, but it was a well-written letter, and I think everybody on the board, if they haven't already read it, need to hear it, and I think the general public needs to hear it too.
Actually, I don't have a copy of it in front of me. It's
Okay,
on the device.
well,
It's on the
hold
device
on,
I'm using
hold
to
on.
do the Zoom meeting, unfortunately.
Memo,
Yes.
dear Memo, this is David Follis, Director of CVE. Where's the ones from? Hold on, we have it somewhere in front of me, I'm pretty sure.
I tried printing it before the meeting off the.
Oh, here we go.
email.
I got it. I got it here. So I'll read that real quick if you don't mind. Okay. I've been
Absolutely.
pondering the recent discussion that occurred at our last meeting as it concerns the proposed solar article. I believe that there may be a way to give more protections to the neighbors of large commercial solar arrays that are being placed in a residential district. Since it seems that the townspeople are in favor of giving these arrays the ability to be located in residential zones, areas in lieu of housing, it only makes sense that a good visual screen and common sense approach to any potential noise pollution should be considered paramount. However, due to the extremely constrictive nature of the bylaw and the lack of flexibility allows for the planning board to address situations on a case-by-case manner, I believe it behooves the planning board and better serve the community that we create a set of rules and regulations for these commercial arrays in residential areas. We may want to increase our bylaw distance, or better yet, make the current 50-foot wide area a no-touch zone and or require either a visual screen or increased vegetative buffer. We should also require that a sound and lighting plan be turned into the planning board as part of the initial submission. I also believe that it should be the goal of the board to have zero sound emission and light emission leave the site. However, the placement of this requirement may be either in the bylaw or the less restrictive rules and regulations. As I stated before, I believe the rules and regulations will give the planning board more latitude in the decision-making process and allow them to apply it to a case-by-case situation. I write this in response to the chairman's request that if any member had a comment or idea to submit it in writing to the board prior to the next meeting. Respectfully submitted, thank you, Bob Joes. And so you hit the nail on the head 1,000 times over, and so for the general public to understand what Bob was saying there, a bylaw is voted on at town meeting and it is gospel. It is the word, okay? There are no derivations allowed from the bylaw. From rules and regulations, the planning board or board of health or conservation commission have the ability, when certain situations arise, to consider a less restrictive, if you will, requirement, or can look at certain situations and have some latitude, to Bob's point, with myriad things. So it's interesting that, Bob, you left with that same thing, and I kind of was thinking the same thing also. I like bylaws because it tells the applicant, it gives them the base knowledge of where to start their project. An initial design. So I like having some stuff in there, but to Bob's point, when you look at our subdivision control law, when you look at any number of bylaws that we have in town, they're associated with rules and regulations that spell out specifically. Bylaws are meant to be a bit general in what they do and how they do it, and then rules and regulations, so that rules and regulations can change through a public hearing to the planning board or board of health or Concom, and allows us to change more rapidly with the times rather than waiting for the 2 times a year that we might have a town meeting. So I'm wondering, now I threw out an idea, I think at the end of last meeting, if I'm not mistaken, or at least in my head I did, that I think at the end of the day, if we just came up with a standard, and I think we had talked about maybe 175-foot setback that was in the bylaw, and then after that, we started holding public hearings relative to the rules and regulations to get into them, and that's where you really get into the minutia of of how we permit these relative to noise and light, and that's where you'd put the amount of lumens and the decibels, and that's typically not in the bylaw. So it was not lost on me during the conversation that it's clear that we can tweak this in a way to, I think, keep everybody partly happy or satisfied. Because while we've had a couple letters that are, I would say, in general, opposing solar in town, we've also received a couple from persons that were in favor of it. And I think one of them was from Mr. Claremont. He's on the call today, if I'm not mistaken. We've got one from Robert Claremont and one from Edmund Claremont. And I'll give you the gist of it, that they're curious as to what the scientific information used to come up with these numbers. I hope that they weren't pulled out of the air to placate somebody. No matter what the buffer zoning is, the abutting trees may be affected. Solar farming is the best energy alternative at the moment and has less impact than fracking and windmills, which can be unsightly and noisy, as evidenced by a court order to shut down 2 windmills in Falmouth due to the humming noise. Windmills are also require oil to operate, and there's no guarantee oil not leak into the environment. It seems the 50-foot buffer regulation is working, and as the saying goes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Now, again, this is coming from somebody who has admitted that they've applied for or are in the middle of applying for a solar permit. So, but it doesn't diminish their opinions. And I would suggest that you don't need a scientific study when you've been doing some of this stuff as long as we have been, and when most of us have been on this earth for a good amount of time, to see that in some cases the 50 feet is not appropriate. It just doesn't work. I don't know about the other planning board members, but I don't need a scientist to come down and charge me a whole boatload of money for me to go out there and realize that, if the requirement is 50 feet to have a residential house off the frontage of the road, I would say that when a commercial use like this, where it abuts residential, it's not too much to ask that they would be back a little bit further than that. So I appreciate, again, not a bad question, but I just, in my humble opinion, I don't think it takes a scientific study to look at that. We also received a letter from a Robert Claremont basically stating the fact that they have are in the process of submitting an application. They have submitted one to the state in 2020, and they said their project is relatively small. The inverted values will not be heard. So again, they're speaking, and which is somewhat appropriate, but not really. They're speaking specifically where this bylaw applies to just them and their project. And I would say that while they would make the statements that there is no impact, and while other residents who abut solar would say that it's a tremendous impact, I would say that the truth probably, as planning board members have seen after permitting a lot of these, that the truth lies somewhere in the middle. And there's no doubt that we probably could do something better with our rules and regulations. And Bob, so kudos to you. Dave, Dave Croce, you've also sent in a letter. And where is that now, Chris? CMS. No, that's Bob Claremont. Here it is. There it is. Okay. So this is from Dave Croce. He's our associate member. He's still here. For those interested, why I don't call on him to vote, he would only be voting on instances of a lack of a quorum for special permit purposes only. I know it sounds very restrictive, but it doesn't limit their participation in our general discussions, particularly when it comes to bylaws. Not a voting member on this, but certainly a valuable member and a valuable voice that we'd like to hear. So it is a very short one, but poignant. I have some comments on the bylaw, but no concrete text. If you are going to call it vegetated, then be consistent. Call everything vegetated buffer or vegetated or a vegetated buffer. And that is true, Dave. It's no good when you have a lack of consistency throughout a bylaw or rules and regulations. Leads to confusion. How to propose setbacks for irregular shaped lots where the setback would be greater than the lot dimension. How does that work? And you're right. So that got me to thinking, and I went, kind of looked at the map and said, yeah, I could see where 1,000-foot setback on a 100-acre lot would be extremely restrictive. And I guess I would answer your question, Dave, and anyone else on the board that wants to chime in, that while we try to do, and Bob talked about this last week, we try to do the greatest good for the greatest amount of people. There are just going to be situations, Dave, that do not lend itself to this type of development, whether it's shape of lot, amount of wetlands, the geography of the lot. I will tell you that, and I touched upon it briefly, the wording, and I'm going to take this as a my mistake. The wording should have been better. It shouldn't be for lots. It should be arrays. So what do I mean? You could have a 15-acre lot, but you're only putting a 10-acre array. So in that case, if you have an odd-sized lot, if it's only 10 acres, you could be within the 100. You could go to the 100 feet or 75, whatever we decide, right? But again, at the end of the day, it's not our job to make every project work on every lot. It's our job to make sure or try to ensure that the greatest amount of good is applied to the greatest amount of people in our community. So that being said, I'm gonna open it up to Bob now and any other board members, and I'd really like to hear two things. One, if you are in agreement that some of these smaller things that have been brought up during the public hearing, we should address through the rules and regulations. And two, now we don't have to do anything, but I would like to get some input on going, if we would want to change the baseline setback on this bylaw. I've done most of the talking last week and today, and so I'm going to quiet myself and I'm going to let the rest of the board members speak. So feel free. So Bob, if you have anything to add,
I think you would have.
Go
You
ahead.
did quite well. Go ahead, Jim.
I do like Bob's idea with doing most of this through rules and regulations. It definitely gives us some, like you said, flexibility. The 50-foot versus 75 feet, I don't know. where that point is that everybody would be happy. If there's a big difference between 50 and 75, I don't know if that's a big enough difference to be an impact on a neighborhood. And also, I do like the no-touch zone that gives a vegetated. If there's not all lots, you get a lot. Some of these lots that put solar could be a clear one big flat lot, and that wouldn't be relevant. But if there's a heavily wooded lot, I do like a no-touch zone that could keep some of the protection for some of the neighborhoods.
To be truthful, my intention for the no-touch 50, 75, the 75 was more of a buffer. And giving some thought to what Kevin said last week about, what if the lot's already perfectly cleared? I think it's one of those either-or situations or situation. The idea is to have a visual screen from the neighbors, the affected neighbors. And if the lot was already fully cleared, well, that wouldn't, that 50 foot of dead space that has no buffer anyhow wouldn't do anything for anyone. So that is where, to me, maybe an either-or situation would apply. If the 50 foot or 75 foot, whatever the buffer zone that the board decides to be, won't have an impact on blocking or screening the project, then there should be some consideration, whether it's plantings, whether it's where we've done banks in the past, we've done berms, I should say, in the past. We've done tree plantings on berms. Some of those didn't work out because the steepness, and they died. But there's got to be some kind of screening so the process can go on. However, the neighbors aren't affected like they have been on some of these projects. Some of these projects, 50 foot, 70 foot, even 100 foot, they're high old growth hardwoods, which you're seeing right through. The pines offer some screening that the hardwoods don't, and you're just seeing through the trees, and you can see right through the trunks and into the project. And I think the idea of this, at least in my mind, the idea of the no-touch zone or the 50 to 75 foot is more the visual screen, the visual barrier. And maybe it's an either-or situation, or maybe it's a hard number, 75 feet or 100 feet, and visual screening if none is provided by that setback buffer, or maybe it goes down to a 50 foot if you add visual screening.
Yeah, I like that idea.
Yeah. So if I could, so everybody out there understands, the first person who spoke was Jim Freites. Bob Joes after that, and if I'm not mistaken, was that Chris Mello who said that he agreed with Bob Joes just then?
Yeah, it was. Because I've been on, we were involved on a job site that we ended up putting a berm and fence on top of it, a wooden fence to block the solar farm from the residents.
Yeah, so what I did was I started looking at different ways, because the vegetative buffer, while it sounds great, it's all natural. To Bob's point, not every lot's going to have that. So I like Bob, Jim, Chris, all the very good ideas with the berms and it might be just as simple at the end of the day of when we create rules and regulations that state no part of that solar array can be visible to the abutting properties, we asked for renderings, and shame on me for not knowing the exact word, but they are able to give elevations and sight lines much like they can a light plan or a noise plan. And I don't think that would be too onerous of a task to require solar, particularly when it's in and around residential neighborhoods, to give us an example and show us that, in fact, whatever screening they are providing is going to do just that. You go down Braley Road and you see that, we have berms on some of them going down Braley Road. And it's interesting that there's berms on those that are in the industrial area on Braley Road. But we thought it necessary because they had no vegetated buffer. So I like putting that stuff in the rules and regulations, general wording that says something to the effect that no, visual screening must be provided so that no visual impact will be seen from the abutting residential neighborhoods. You say something as general as that, now it's up to the applicant to provide us with how they're going to do it. Whether it's a berm with a vegetated buffer on top or a wooden fence on top, or whether it's just a stand of trees that they're going. So, yeah, that sounds, again, I'm liking more and more utilizing regulations, because when you look at some of the concerns and comments from abutters, they're very specific about certain things. And if we can address those specific certain things during the public hearing process, I think there'll be better projects going forward. There was, to go back to one of the initial letters that we had received too, and then I promise I'll shut up again, from 14 Algonquin. They spoke, we feel strong wording relative to what a clear definition of vegetative buffer. So and we feel some strong wording needs to be added to the proposed changes to prevent developers of these solar arrays from dumping rocks and other debris in areas not designated for such things. We are not sure where this language needs to be inserted, but based on our experience, we know it needs to be added somewhere. And I'd say at the end of the day that a pile of rocks on somebody's property, that's not the minutia by which the planning board wants to get into. If somebody wants to put a pile of rocks on their property, if it becomes an issue and it's called, then, but the reason why I wanted to talk about that briefly is just that our job isn't to design these things for them. If somebody wants to surround their property with stone, they could certainly do that. Just like if they wanted to cut a bunch of trees and lay them down on the ground, whatever the case may be. And so I get it. We wouldn't want tons of stone and rock dumped at the front of this, of anything to make it look unsightly. But it's just, typically we don't get into, at least this town historically has not gotten into, you know, what are you going to do with some extra rocks that you have on your property? You know, it's easy to come up with regulations. It's easy to tell somebody how to do something. But when you start looking at the costs associated with these things, there has to be a fairness both to the town and to applicants, whether they be homeowners applying for a building permit or commercial enterprise applying for some sort of permit to operate a business here in town. So what I'm hearing is that we're all in agreement. We want to move forward. We want to have rules and regulations that are more robust. And those types of conversations typically take a while. They're worked on for a while, as some of our members know. It's taken us, that site plan review rules and regulations and bylaw, I think, took well over 2 years to do. And that was with some technical assistance. And so I think if we can utilize some of our technical assistance money to assist us with these rules and regulations and how we write them so that they can be more, and the technical assistance grant, for anybody who doesn't know, that is given to the towns in our region by SERPED, the Southeastern Regional Planning and Economic Development Group. And what they do is they come in and they offer assistance to towns like ours who may not have full-time planning staff and have the ability to do these things. We're given grant monies and we have utilized them for any number of bylaws in the past. And I think now that I'm hearing everybody, what I'm assuming is an agreement that we should probably look to create or to hold a public hearing maybe starting the end of next month, and see if we can't get SERPED to come down for that meeting and get us off on the right foot. Am I hearing everybody correctly in that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you,
Yeah.
Chris. Bob, you're okay.
Yeah.
Jimmy, you said so,
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Is Deb still on?
Debbie, you still
I
there?
am. Yep, that sounds good. Yep, that sounds good.
All right, thank you, Debbie. So I guess at the end of the day, really the only thing that remains is that was spoken about from the last meeting and brought up is what do we want to do in the bylaw relative to a buffer? Because you're right. You know, we may not need to have somebody have a 100-foot buffer off of a property line if in fact they're going to come up with some sort of either vegetative screening, some sort of something that is going to allow them to install the array and not have any visual pollution, as Bob put it earlier, to the neighborhood. So you're right. I in my mind, I thought it was a bit easier or more direct to say, hey, this is it. This is how far you have to be away from a property line. But it does no good if the property is complete. Let's say it's a cranberry bog, right? And it's completely devoid of trees because they grow cranberries, and they could be 200, 300 feet off the road, and you have nothing to stop the visual effect, if you will. Regulations would give us that authority. So, does anybody have any opinion on whether we should change the 50 feet to 100 feet, 75, whatever the case may be? Or is it that you are adamant or at least resolved to fix this problem via the regulations?
Kev, the only thing I say about the 50 is because we have it set up already with home construction. So if somebody went into that lot, they could have cleared it and built houses within 50 feet of those lots. So that's the only thing that's a sticking point for me. And would 75 feet actually be enough step back that it would make a difference as well to make the neighborhood happy or content?
Right.
The other thing too is like to Jim's point, the house clearing is a setback. You can still clear right up to the street, and most houses are cleared right to the street. I think it's more important that we have whatever that dimension is. There's some portion of it's a no-touch zone. Some portion of it leaves the natural state as it is. Whether it's the 50 feet and maybe we add another 25 or add another 50. So I think the first 50 feet probably should be a no-touch zone, except to access the property for construction and maintenance. Besides that, a small area that they designate that's their construction/maintenance access. Besides that, there's a 50-foot ring around it that's a no-touch area. And then from there, if the board feels it wants to increase that 75, 100, whatever the board's pleasure is, I think that would be appropriate. But a 50-foot ring, to me, in my opinion, around a no-touch zone around that is probably a better way to go in the bylaw. And then from there, we can make it much more restrictive in the rules and regulations.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that everybody is basically, I shouldn't say everybody, but members are comfortable with maintaining the 50-foot, and we'd like it to basically read no touch buffer, something along those lines, because we want it to Bob. And what I'm going to have Chris do is whatever we decide on today in wording, I'm going to have Chris write it up, insert the proposed wording changes in, allow you folks, and we'll even put it online for the general public to review it before we vote on it. Not having the wording, I don't want to lose something in translation. I want to see what it looks like written down. I want to see what it looks like sitting next to the other stuff in the bylaws to make sure we're not doing something that's counters what we have in there. So
Now, let me ask you something. So if you had a 50-foot no touch zone and it was full of trees from the property to that, where do you think the solar panels would end up going with that height of the trees on that property that would not allow any shading onto that property? What kind of impact would that have?
I really don't know. And so and that's why I say, Jim, that's a very, very good point. What we've done in the past is, and this is a perfect example of where a regulation allows you to work with an individual applicant rather than the bylaw. 50-foot no touch is just that, no touch. We know the intent is to provide vegetative screening or a buffer of some sort to the abutting property. But somebody comes in and says, yeah, I'm willing not to cut the tree down completely, but I want to top every one of them off at 20 feet. This will provide a vegetative screening, right? But it also provides sunlight onto the arrays. And we've seen that happen in a couple places in town. If we're not careful how we write that, then applicants aren't allowed that option. Now, that might be what the planning board wants or what ultimately town meeting would vote on or the rules and regulations would decide. But that's basically what that means. Either they would have to stay further away for shading, or we are more specific in how we write these buffer zones, no touch, that it allows for topping of trees. It may be that, the no touch of 50 foot exists with minimum elevation of all trees with a diameter greater than 6 inches must be maintained of 20 foot minimum, right? There are myriad ways that we can word things and all. That's clumsy wording in a bylaw. But if no touch zone or vegetative buffer, whatever, is defined within the bylaw, and then the bylaw says that there must be a vegetative buffer, that's a little bit cleaner. And then in the rules and regulations, if we can get into different types of vegetative screening and that. Okay. So no, that's a Jim, I would say if this was an easy solution, we would have all come up with it by now, but it's not. We recognize that allowing solar in residential is a valuable tool for us to manage our growth within town, and clearly it's been demonstrated that we bring in a sizable amount of money. Now, going forward, depending on what the state legislature does, it may not be as much, but will certainly be more net win for the town as compared to if it was all houses. I'm not going to beat that horse again, but the math is pretty simple. One child, $15,000 a year to you round numbers. Average house in town isn't even paying $5,000 in taxes a year. So for every year in our school, it takes that house 3 years to pay back that one child. So 10 years of schooling in our town, it takes that house 30 years to pay back, and that's all based on today's numbers. Towns cannot continue to not allow business to come into town and only allow residential without going through Prop 2.5 overrides, without diminishing services. I'm not going to speak ill of communities that surround us, but I think if people take a long, hard look at some of our immediate neighbors, they will see that we have a great school system, professional police and fire, full-time. Streets get taken care of in the wintertime. We have professional staff down here at Town Hall that is taking care of things. That's not possible in other communities when you're solely relying on residential taxes. And it's a bit unfair for folks to sit there and say that that's okay, because they may be in a position to pay higher taxes. But I don't know about you. I like my tax bill as low as possible. And I know a bunch of people in our community, lifelong citizens, that every $100, $200 increase in their life over the course of a year it's hurting. It really is. So these are all the things that we need to consider when we're doing these things. So I guess not to continue to beat this dead horse. I know that there are others from the general public on the Zoom meeting. If anybody would like to comment now or has anything, I would just politely ask that you would state your name so that we all know who's talking, and we go from there.
I'll make a comment.
Sure.
Hi, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for having me. I'm Ryan Young. I'll be very, very brief. CBE and myself, we support the rules and regulation approach. It sounds like you're on the right track. We would certainly support and have no problem with submitting any sort of noise, light, or screening plans. That's already in practice in most towns, and we don't have any problem meeting and solving the problems. I did want to comment just quickly. There was a suggestion to put in a no-touch buffer, or having the 50 feet no touch. If you do end up proposing that, we can describe in more detail about why that's problematic, and it's problematic to write. But just think about it this way. In towns where they do that, a landowner, if they know that there's a 50-foot no-touch zone, they just clear the whole lot. They'll clear cut everything, and they'll say they're going to do sheep farming, or they say they're going to do a housing development, because that's allowed. Like was mentioned, a housing development, you can clear all the way up to the lot. So the landowner just clears the lot anyway, and then they go under agreement with the solar company, and then they don't have to worry about the no-touch buffer, or they just keep the no-touch buffer in place in terms of allowing vegetation to grow up, or natural screening. But there's a bunch of reasons why the no-touch buffer is problematic to write, and also for you to enforce. And I think there's a better way to do it in your rules and regulations, and with screening and implementing actual noise regulations. But with that, I look forward to seeing what you put down on paper, so we can respond to it. And thanks for your time.
Sure. Now, you're not wrong, Mr. Young. It's not our first rodeo either. We're acutely aware that folks will actually go out there and do things like that, which Bob and Jim and Chris and Deb brought up too, right? That the regulations then. So if you want to be, a smart aleck, if you will, Mr. Young, and go out and do those things and say, well, yeah, I've changed my mind now. Well, you would have the 50-foot no touch, and our rules and regulations would allow us latitude to cause you to have to, build a berm, if you will, with a vegetated screening on top of that. And so I will add another layer to your that they would then have to weigh the options on what the cost is and what the effect is going to have on their solar project, should they choose to move forward. So you're not wrong. We're not wrong. Listen, I'm not trying to have an adversarial relationship, but the fact of the matter is, you're on that side trying to get a project through. We're on our side trying to do it. And so I think we're all professional enough to appreciate each other's positions, and your comments haven't gone unnoticed. So thank you very much. Is there anyone else from the public that would like to speak on this? Remember, if you are muted or if you're having trouble, it's *6, and that gets you into the meeting. So you can holler at me or us. Looks like everybody is going to continue to stay muted, so I'm okay with that. All right. So let me just ask you, is anybody willing to make a motion on this right now, or is this something that you would like to continue working on and maybe wait to change this until after we've come up with our rules and regulations so that it will better define what we're doing within the bylaw?
Just a point of order, Mr. Chairman. I believe normally we would close the public hearing portion of it and then delegate in open session, but not as a public hearing.
We would, but what I'm really looking, and you're not wrong, I'm looking to find out if this is at the point, are we at the point now where we are going to close the public hearing to the public? Or is this something that we want to continue leaving open so that we can continue to work on it? That's really all I was asking at that point in time. Are you ready to move forward and not and close the public hearing? So I'll, I know it's tough with the Zoom guys. So I'm asking, are we ready to do anything definitive on this? Or is this something we want more discussion, but we would, to Bob's point, typically when we do that, we close the public part of the public hearing so that we can talk amongst ourselves. Keeping in mind, again, that the rules and regulations public hearing, that's gonna go on and on. That'll be many meetings over some time, I'm pretty sure.
And
So
all
that's
deliberations
where-
are in open session and
That's
still
all
on
open
Zoom.
session, public
It's
hearing,
still,
and I
it's
hope,
just not soliciting public comment at that point.
yeah, you take public comment at that point and all, but it doesn't have to go to town meeting. And my hope is that at some point in time, there's gonna be a cure or something, or a corona vaccine, something, so that we can get back to some sort of normalcy, because this is not normal for me, it's not normal for us. I don't like doing business this way, but it's the hand we're dealt. And so before I get off the planning board in another year or so, I'd like to be able to get back to in-face meetings so I can see everybody again.
Yeah, okay.
So, if that's the case, Bob, and somebody wants to make a motion to close the public hearing, I'm accepting any and all motions at this point in time.
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
Motion's been made to
I'll
close the
second that.
public hearing. Motion's been made to close the public hearing. A second has been made. Any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Roll call vote signify by saying aye. Bob Joes.
Aye.
Bob Joes, aye. Deb Robbins.
Aye.
Deb Robbins, aye. Jim Freites.
Aye.
Jim Freites, aye. Chris Mello.
Aye.
Chris Mello, aye. Kevin Damaris, aye. Motion passes unanimously to close the public hearing portion of our public hearing. So what does that mean? It means we're done taking the public comment relative to this. Public comment now will be moved to when we have the public hearing on the rules and regulations. Chris, let's try and find a date towards the end of October and see if we can't send that out to folks. It doesn't have to be right now. And let's find a couple of dates and see if we can't get the ball rolling on that. Let's check with Serped and see if they wouldn't be interested in at least coming down. And in the meantime, you can, if our rules and regulations for solar or whatever are not online, let's make sure we have everything that we have online, and let's look at other towns to see if they have, a lot of people have good ideas, and I'm not averse to taking them. So
As it relates
Now,
to
I don't
the article in front of us, though, Mr. Chair, we have discussion about the 50-foot, 75-foot, the no-touch, the no-touch. Where we're going to do rules and regulations, I'd like to keep the base. In my personal opinion, we should keep the base as low, and we add more restrictions into the rules and regulations. However, we are mute in our bylaw language about requiring plans for screening plan, light plan, and sound emission plans. And personally, I think as a base, we should have those in the bylaw that they're required on submission. And then in the rules and regulations, we can require what we want for whether it's how many lumens and where, if they go off site, if they don't go off site, decibels, all that stuff can be in rules and regulations. But in my opinion, we should at least have them in the bylaw that the submission is required. And then what is done with them by the planning board would be up to the board at that point and on a case by case submission.
that's a good point. So what I'm hearing is we'll have Chris somewhere in the beginning of our bylaw, right, where the definitions and all, with the scope and what the requirements are. So we're looking for a light plan, right? More specifically, light leaving the site, right?
Correct.
Okay. And so I would like to be able to put in there light plan. Light should not, plans should be designed to not allow light to leave the site, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Let me ask you something.
Noise.
Now, in the process, usually sometimes when these projects come forth before us, some of the lighting plans and the sound is kind of is put into the plans, but maybe put in a little down in a little bit further down the design process, because they seem to come to us with a rudimentary set of plans at the beginning just to feel on what we think is going to happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's happened more recently, and I think you were at the meeting. I think the planning board made its point with those applicants, and I think we made a point with our staff that, you know, going forward, we need more complete submittals. And so I think what Bob is trying to say is if we have that as a requirement, Jim, in our regulation, in our bylaw, and somebody opens up the bylaw and says, okay, what do I need to do? They're going to know when they come in, the first thing they're required is a light plan, is a noise plan, is a visual impact plan, right? So they know they don't get past go unless they have those.
Okay.
So by putting it in the bylaw, putting it up front and saying, in order for this to be a complete submittal, you must have. And these will be a bit more robust. You'll have a light plan that shows the lumens and all, and there'll be a narrative associated with it. Same thing with the noise plan, rather to the decibel levels, and there'll be a narrative associated with it, and same thing with the visual impact. So it'll be shown on the plan, there'll be a narrative, and oftentimes there's graphs or charts with those. So you're right, Jim. A lot of times folks come in, and I don't care what they're applying for, and then they wait for us to tell them what we want. Well, by putting this in the bylaw, it's going to tell them up front what we want.
Okay.
So,
At least tells them we want it, so they know we want it for this submission. And they'll have the rules and regulations, so they can see what's in the rules and regulations. And if they're going to ask for waivers from the rules and regulations, they'll know at that point what they were, how it affects them. But at least the plan will be in and right from the beginning. We're not waiting for it or not being submitted at all.
Most of that stuff's right in the manufacturer's, like say the sound. I would think it's right in there, right in the specs. It's just plugging it into the plans early and often.
Right.
That's
the
right.
cut sheets will have it, you know. But at the end of the day, if we can do everything within our power to offset any kind of impact, particularly around residential neighborhoods, we're going to have better projects, and it's going to be better for the community. So, Bob, you brought your A game. You and Jimmy have brought your A game tonight. So I'm glad that it's we're having this conversation.
You just grade us on a sliding scale.
I wish this was the case in high school.
Just great. So I guess then what I'm going to do is, no one else is jumping up and down to increase the setback or no touch or what have you, if you will. But what I do here is people are jumping up and down and saying, give us the authority and give us the power to, through the rules and regulations, to enforce some of these things and really be able to tweak individual applications to better suit each location. So what I'm going to do then, if no one else has anything to add, I'm going to have Chris work on some wording. Hopefully he'll get that out in the next day or two. Have him add in the light plan, add in the definition of a vegetated buffer. Even if we just add definitions in there, when we refer to them in the rules and regulations, we know what they mean, right? I'll have him disseminate those. They'll be available online through our website. You can put them on in a PDF. Make sure you put the draft watermark on them so nobody takes them to be gospel. And we will. When's our next meeting?
Just to clarify too, Mr. Chairman, I'm not opposed to a 72 increase in the buffer in the residential area to a 75-foot buffer at the will of the board. I just think anything more restrictive to that should really be in rules and regulations, and we can deal with it on a case-by-case basis. But if the board, and there is a couple of members we haven't really heard from, but if the board does have an appetite to increase the vegetative, the buffer in the residential zone, I am absolutely not adverse to that.
75 feet?
I was saying go up to 75, but I mean,
okay,
it'll be more onerous on some projects, but I don't know if that's, again, it's up to the board's decision. I can right. I can see it addressed both ways, and I think the main address should be in rules and regulations. But if the board sees it fit that it wants to increase to 75, I would definitely not be adverse to that.
So what I'll have Chris do then, and I know Jim, you mentioned it earlier. The 75 feet, is that off-putting to you, or? Keeping in mind, we put it in the document. We talk about it at the next meeting. We might change our minds. We might come up with something different. And then it goes to town meeting And it could get changed yet again on town meeting floor. So, how about this? Do the members agree that we will have this, the draft that Chris is going to create will increase the setback or the no touch, if you will, to 75 feet jumping off and standard for everybody? And then we can move forward with the remainder of these things at our next meeting. I'm just
Yeah,
going
I'm
by
good with that.
consensus.
Yeah.
I don't need a motion. I just,
No,
All right, so
I'm
Jim,
comfortable with that.
okay.
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, I'm sorry?
I mean, the third.
That's okay.
Okay.
Yeah. I see.
Now, let me ask you something, Kev.
Well,
Just out of
Just hold on, Jim. Hold on, please. Hold
okay, sorry.
on. That's all right. Chris and Deb and Dave, if you will, we all set with, at least for now, assuming that 75 foot would be the standard and the jumping off point going forward for these around residential areas?
I'm fine with that, Kevin.
Okay. I'm assuming that silence means you're not opposed to that. So Dave, you
Not
are
opposed
still
to it.
muted if, okay, and Dave, you're still muted, so if you are trying to tell me yes or no, there you go, you're unmuted now. Are you,
75 is fine.
okay, thank you. All right, so Chris, when you write these up, let's put 75 feet in there. Let's have a better description of the vegetative buffer. And again, Serpa can help you, or we can find something. Because there may be times where we would be referring to a vegetative buffer, which is going to be different than a no touch, which is going to be different than a visual impact screening. So here's the kicker though. Town meeting is the 3rd. And so our next meeting would be the 6th. I don't know if we're going to, so obviously I can do the math. That is after the 3rd. So we will not have this wrapped up in time. That wasn't my intent. I'm wondering if people would be available to meet the last week of September so that we would have some sort of recommendation for the selectmen or for town meeting.
The 3rd, I
I'm-
thought the
I'm
town meeting
fine, Kevin.
was the 15th. The town
I'm
meeting's
sorry.
the 3rd of October?
I thought the town meeting was the 3rd of October. That's what it says on the town website. Unless Tim has gone off the deep end, I think
Okay.
it's the 3rd.
No, I was just trying to do
So-
the math because they just approved it yesterday. So I was trying to do the math out, but if you say it's the 3rd, then it's the 3rd.
Well, it's on the website, so we're gonna go with
Okay.
the 3rd.
I apologize.
No, please. So the last, today is what, the 15th, right? So the last week of September would be 2 weeks from now. Does anybody have a problem with doing it that Tuesday?
I have no problem with that.
29th? Okay. All right. So that being said, what I'll do is I'll have Chris do that.
Did you say you had a problem, Bob?
I do have a conflict, but that the rest of the board
Here's
can
the
speak.
conflict.
It's up to the rest of the board.
Okay.
My position's pretty
Well, it's,
pretty well stated already.
yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, what we're really doing at this point in time is inserting the language that we talked about, making sure that everybody is in agreement that that's the language that we did talk about. And so if you have any comments, Bob, once Chris sends this out, then please feel free to submit those in writing also, and that way we would have them for the record. And if anybody, again, wants to take a look from the general public, wants to take a look at these things, once the draft is put online, feel free to comment on that also. So that being said, if no one has anything else, I would entertain a motion to continue the public hearing. The public hearing has been closed to the public.
no
The
motions.
public hearing is still open, Chris, so we continue the public hearing. And to the 29th, you said, and we can do that when it's 6 o'clock. Does that work, 6 o'clock on the 29th for people?
What do you? I'm confused. What are you continuing?
The public hearing for this?
The public hearing's closed. We're just doing deliberation.
No,
So that's
No.
a posted meeting.
we closed the public portion of the public hearing. This is not, the public hearing is not, If we want to do this at another night, we have to continue this to another night. We're just not taking any more public input, but it's still, it's open to the public.
Thank you for the point of clarification. I'll make that at, on the September 29th at 6 p.m. via Zoom.
Thank you. I need a second.
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 Well, thank you. Motion's been made and supported. Hope to continue the public hearing to September 29th, 6 o'clock via Zoom. Roll call vote. Bob Joes.
Aye.
Bob Joes, aye. Deb Robbins.
Aye.
Deb Robbins, aye. Jim Freites.
Aye.
Jim Freites, aye. Chris Mello.
Aye.
Chris Mello, aye. Kevin Demarais states aye. So the motion carries unanimous to continue the public hearing. Again, folks, you'll be receiving something in the next couple of days, or look online on our website to see where it is. It'll be in the same place that we've put all the other public hearing documents for the public to read. All right. Next on our agenda is item number 7. This is discussion on Chapter 61 removal request for 0 Braley Road and 75 Quantapug Road. And this is basically our first right of refusal. They ask us if the town wants to buy it. The town never has any money, and we have never bought anything. So it's typically just it's an exercise that we have to do in order for them to move forward. The good news is if they're taking it out of Chapter 61, that means we're going to get full and fair market value on our taxes. So unless anybody has well, we just don't have any money to buy a piece of property. I don't know what we're going to do, but does anybody have any comments or questions on that? No. Okay, has anybody had a chance to look at the minutes? There are no minutes, so don't look at them, please.
No.
We're up to date on our minutes, which is good, I believe. And then we have a schedule of bills payable. We didn't have any bills. Been slow times around here. So that being said, I don't think I have anything else on our agenda, at least not listed. So that means I can't legally talk about it. Yeah? That is true. There is the old, anything to properly come before the board. So we had received, the Conservation Commission had received an application relative to Locust Acres, which is Sammy's Lane. It was created 3 lots or 2 lots. Long story short, we had approved it many moons ago. No work was completed or even undertaken or anything for that matter. And their permit expired. Their subdivision approval expired and their covenants expired. Well, lo and behold, wouldn't you know, they've come in with 2 applications for notice of intent conservation-wise to build the houses. And we're like, the lots don't even exist. So we've discussed with the applicant's representative and a potential new owner. They may be reapplying using the same plan. You know, it's gone through engineer review and all, but just the mechanics are that it needs to be reapproved because their extension has expired. So that may or may not be happening, but just in light of what Jim brought up, he's trying to keep you in the loop on things that are happening outside of the meeting. It's been kind of slow, but that was something that that took place, and it seems that everybody's in agreement. It has expired. We have the documentation to back it up, and they're going to have to reapply if they want to move forward with that project. So unless anybody has anything else to add, well, I will accept everybody's favorite motion.
Quick question. Has there already been any submissions for subdivision plan off of either Friends Way or Friends Street or North Main Street?
That would be Byron Holmes is the engineer on that. Did we get that one yet? Planning Board has not received it. Conservation received it, but Planning Board has not received it.
Okay, I was just curious if there'd been any submissions on it yet.
Yeah, so this is not dealing with Planning Board, but there was cause of concern when they were out there doing perk tests. I went out there in response to the complaint, and it was shown, demonstrated on a plan, and my visual inspection, not to mention the Board of Health agent was there, and they were doing perk tests. They were outside the 100-foot buffer zone. Doesn't make sense to do a perk test in the wet area because it won't perk, and you can't get an approval if you're within 100 feet of a wetland. So a subdivision plan exists. It just has not been submitted to us for our approval yet. Okay? Perfect.
Yep, that's all the
Right.
question.
If no one has anything else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Deb, you're up.
Debbie, Chris,
Second. I mean,
Chris, I need a second.
second.
Third.
All right, motion's been made and supported. Any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those signify by saying aye. Roll call vote. Bob Joes.
Aye.
Aye. Deb Robbins.
Aye.
Deb Robbins, aye. Jim Freight.
Aye.
Jim Freight's aye. Chris Mello.
Aye.
Chris Mello, aye. Kevin Demaris states aye. Guys, thank you. Great meeting. Everybody had some input. I appreciate you. It's hard doing this. I'm not going to lie to you. It's hard doing this via Zoom. But I do appreciate everybody's attention and look forward to working more with this in the future. So we'll get that out to you this week. You'll have a week to munch on it.
We just want to see your. We just want to see your face, Kev. We want to see a picture of you on here.
Yeah,
Well,
Jim,
so we have a witness.
Jim, you clearly don't own a mirror. Because, man. All right, we're going to end this meeting.
I can stop at the
meeting
carnival and get you a good one.
The meeting has been adjourned. Everybody have a safe week. And if there's any questions, comments, please forward them to Chris. Thank you all.
Good night, everybody. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Good night.
Good night.
Have a
Bye-bye.
good one. Bye.
Thanks, Kevin.